The Jagdpanther is, in my opinion, a near-perfect combination of armour, firepower and mobility, combining the best elements of the standard Panther with the savage bite of the mighty Pak 43, the same gun mounted on the Ferdinand tank destroyer and King Tiger tank as well. It was both respected and feared by both friend and foe. Now let's dive in and discover more about this mighty war machine. The German military's need for a high-powered tank destroyer arose from the experiences of fighting the Soviets with tanks such as the T-34 and KV series. With their strong armour, it was needed for a far stronger anti-tank weapon to take them out. The all-round best for fighting these Russian tanks was the Pak 43. This high-velocity 88mm anti-tank gun was a tank slayer, but it was also heavy and difficult to transport, and very hard to manoeuvre, especially for the infantry forces, as it needed some kind of vehicle to help them move it, so to mount it on an armoured chassis became paramount. The solutions came in multiple forms, both with their pros and cons. The first being the Nashorn. This was more of a gun carriage than tank destroyer, being very effective at killing Soviet armour, but with a maximum of only 30mm of armour and on an open top chassis, it really was a glass cannon that could be taken out by even very light weapons. So with the lessons learnt by the Nashorn, the Germans went to the other end of the spectrum with the Ferdinand tank destroyer. This behemoth, based off the rejected Porsche Tiger chassis, was extremely heavily armoured and was extremely effective at fighting Soviet tanks and taking hits in return. The problem came in its heavy weight, lack of mobility, and it also lacked any machine guns for repelling close-range infantry assaults, so a happy medium between the two was needed. So with the introduction of the Panther, the Germans now had a suitable base for a near-perfect tank destroyer, so enter the Jagdpanther. Its initial conception was on August 3, 1942, when the German Department of Army Research and Development had settled on using the Panther chassis as the base of their new tank destroyer. But mass production of the Jagdpanthers wouldn't start until November 1943, as the time from initial concept to production was a rocky one, with the main issue being that the Daimler-Benz factory had limited workspace and they were struggling to reach the production targets of 10 Jagdpanthers per month. So the production element of the contract was then handed over to MEAG, which was supposed to get production back on track, but this also did not go as planned. Even with MEAG on board with production, the aim of 10 Jagdpanthers a month to be produced was still being missed, and the deployment goal of December 1943 was well out of the question. But by June 1944, and the original plan for 160 Jagdpanthers to be completed and ready for combat, it was now a pipe dream, with only 46 having been completed. MEAG complained the production had missed targets because of the damage done by Allied bombing raids and a shortage in workers and materials, but the complaints were answered with 320 men from the Panzerjäger replacement unit being sent to work in their factories. But they still missed the production goals. So two more companies, MHN and MBA, were brought into the production part of the Jagdpanther contract. Now this did have the desired effect, with the production goals now being hit, and actually exceeded sometimes, with a record-breaking month of December 1944, when 67 Jagdpanthers were produced, and now the numbers are actually reaching decent amounts. They can now have a positive effect on the battlefield and be deployed for combat. Another reason for this bumpy production was the Jagdpanther underwent many modifications and adjustments. This meant the factories had to be retooled and the workers needed to be retrained. The most important of these modifications being that the Pak 43, which originally had a monoblock barrel, was switched to a dual piece barrel, which made it far easier to replace after the wear of the high velocity shells going through it. The Jagdpanther also started using a new type of engine cover used on the Panther, the so-called flame destroyer exhaust mufflers. They were then installed, preventing a mixture of fuel and air in the exhaust from igniting, which could lead to having a catastrophic fire and destroying the tank. The biggest advantage of the Jagdpanther was its armament. This mighty machine possessed a gun to even make a Tiger tank crew jealous. Being armed with the Pak 43, able to spit out rounds accurately at over 3,000 metres, and with a muzzle velocity of over 1,000 metres a second, it gave the Jagdpanther extreme killing ability. Even at 2,000 metres, it could still penetrate 153mm of armour, meaning everything from Shermans to T-34s and even the mighty IS series of tanks was able to be destroyed by this beast. And with a mixture of 760 armour-piercing and high-explosive rounds, it could deal with all manner of targets. The Germans had also learned from previous Pak 43 carrying machines, and a coaxial MG-34 machine gun was added for protection against infantry close-range assaults. The crew also carried small arms in the form of two MP40 machine pistols, and each man most likely had a pistol on his person as well. And in later models, the Jagdpanther had the so-called S-mine launcher, close-range defence weapon, which could launch grenades outside the tanks at close range to repel infantry assaults, and it would also keep the crew safe as they did not have to exit the tank and open their hatches. It wasn't just the Pak-43 that made the Jagdpanther effective, it also had good protection. Learning from tank designs from all sides of the conflict, it had thick, sloped frontal armour that gave great protection from anything but the most powerful anti-tank weapons. The specifics of the armour are as follows. The front upper armour was a single plate of 80mm thick at an angle of 55 degrees, with the lower frontal armour being 60mm thick at an angle of 60 degrees. This resulted in an armour thickness of 140mm for the upper plate and 90mm for the lower plate, when shot at level ground. The gun mantlet was just as tough as the frontal armour, with a 100mm thick pighead mantlet which was installed on the gun. The sides of the Jagdpanther being far less protected, with the upper sides being 50mm and lower sides being 40, meaning it was pretty vulnerable to shots from its flanks. This is why all tank crews were instructed to keep the front towards the enemy at all times, as showing the sides, or especially the rear, negated the fantastic protection offered by the frontal armour. This due to its desired purpose as a tank destroyer, as in ideal conditions it would be engaging enemy armour at long range, meaning its frontal armour would be the only side showing towards the enemy tanks. Even with its heavy armour and armament, the Jagdpanther was surprisingly mobile for a tank of its weight and size. Coming in at a combat weight of 46 tons, it was able to achieve a road speed of 29 miles per hour. Pretty damn fast, and it could actually outpace tanks like the M4 Sherman, despite it weighing 15 tons more. This being very useful for the Jagdpanther, being able to quickly move into good firing positions and to ambush allied tanks. Its road range wasn't too bad either, with it being 99 miles in total in ideal conditions, meaning it could go good distances without worrying about running out of fuel. It also had good cross-country performance, similar to that of the Panther, being able to cross most obstacles, and only the most rough terrain or anti-tank barriers being impassable for the tank. The reliability of the Jagdpanther was a major letdown for the tank though. As it came from the same chassis and shared many parts with the Panther, it suffered from many of the same technical difficulties. But some lessons had been learned from the deployment of the Panther at Kursk, with some of the major reliability issues such as oil leaking that could cause the tank to catch a blaze being fixed, but regular issues with the transmission, suspension and quite frankly most of the tank meant that it was a maintenance heavy beast, and far less reliable than such tanks as the Panzer IV or the Sturmgeschütz. The crew for the Jagdpanther numbered 5 in total, down for the originally planned 6. It had a commander, a driver, a gunner, a loader, and a radio operator, who was also the hull machine gunner. This tried and tested method of having crew members with very specific jobs meant they were carried out to a high standard, far superior to what the Soviets did for most of the war by overloading the crew with so many jobs, which resulted in poor performance of many of its tank crews. Each Jagdpanther also had its own radio to keep communication slick and effective, with the commander variants having a longer range radio with more powerful effect. I'll also add there was plans for a Jagdpanther armed with a 128mm main gun, the same gun used on the Jagdtiger. It was nicknamed the Jagdpanther Mit, but it never left the drawing board, only entering the concept stage. Whether the Germans would have actually been able to mount such a colossal gun on the Panther chassis is debatable, but it's interesting to think if it could have worked. In combat, the Jagdpanther was feared and respected, with a combination of good armour and extremely powerful armament and the nimble mobility gave it a brutal trifecta of killing power. Its first actual combat was close to Saint-Martin-de-Bois in France on the 30th of July, where 3 Jagdpanthers engaged Churchill tanks of the 6th Guards Tank Brigade, which were caught out in the open by the German tank destroyers. In just 2 minutes, 11 Churchills had been knocked out, and panic was spreading in the British tank units. Another company of Churchills had to rush in to force the Jagdpanthers to withdraw, using the Allies' sheer numbers to push the Germans back. Even though the British took heavy losses, they were actually able to capture 2 of the Jagdpanthers, due to them being abandoned due to track damage, their reliability being their downfall. These were then sent back to assessment, and a huge hit to the German Jagdpanther crews, as now the Allies would be able to work out its strengths and weaknesses in detail. The crews of these tanks should have most definitely destroyed these vehicles in my opinion. But it's scary to think that if not for these mechanical faults, even more Churchills would have been destroyed, with them having little chance of knocking out the Jagdpanthers, being that the Churchill was extremely undergunned for its size, and its only advantage being its strong armour which the Jagdpanther could penetrate. They were also extremely slow, so the Jagdpanther would have easily been able to outmaneuver the Churchill tanks and carry on this massacre if it wasn't for the fate of reliability. The Jagdpanther had mixed success when it was deployed to the Eastern Front though, with major issues plaguing the crews such as a shortage of spare parts and a lack of training, and in some cases no training on the Jagdpanther up until right before its combat deployment, which greatly reduced its effectiveness. And the majority of Jagpanthers on the Eastern Front being destroyed by their own crews, as when used correctly and in good condition, it was extremely difficult to counter, and normally killing tenfold more tanks than they lost. But as the situation for Germany industrially and logistically became worse, many tanks were simply left by the roadside and sabotaged to avoid them being captured and used by the enemies. By the end of the war, the Jagdpanther had proven its worth, even though not able to make much of an impact, as it was delivered too late to truly get the best effect from it. It still garnered huge respect, with France using around 10 of these vehicles in its own armoured brigades until the 1950s. And it's one of my personal favourite armoured vehicles, with a great mix of firepower, armour and speed, and being able to quite frankly look very elegant for such a big war machine. It will always go down as one of the best tank destroyers of World War II in my opinion. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching everyone. If you did, like, subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll see you on the next one. You guys have a fantastic evening.